Top of the morning to you. Back at it again with a couple of news updates here. I wanted to share a couple of things. And the overall theme of today's news is debt, inflation, and protection. And so here's an article from CNBC, Make It. It has to do with adjusted for inflation, the federal minimum wage is worth less than 50 years ago. And so Kate Rogers, the author of this article here, goes through and lists a couple different facts surrounding, different levels of pay throughout the country. And basically, you just mentioned how, apart from the push for 15, most of the states are below the government recommended wage, and therefore, there's a big, push for earning more. And so it talks about how some of the candidates, primarily Hillary Clinton, is a big fan of the $15 for everyone. And so a lot of people, especially down south in the Midwest, where the cost of living is a little bit cheaper, aren't in favor of that. And so it gives a lot of good stats here. But other than that, this video here just talks about how the minimum wage is, it's a problem because inflation has gone up, and actually mentions that it was actually better. You made more money or had more purchasing power in the 70s when inflation was high, because it equated to about $10.90, the minimum wage, in comparison to today where inflation hasn't kept up. And so it's basically the purchasing power of $7.25, which won't get you much. So worthwhile article here for those that want to find out more about inflation and the minimum wage. And so the next one here is about debt and how our economy is based upon debt. So this one here is from SRS report, and it says the subprime U.S. economy disintegrating due to subprime auto, housing, bond, and energy debt. And so the author here does a great job of just listing various articles himself, where he talks about just the overall theme of the economy is just debt, and the fact that there's too much debt to sustain growth. And so he, this guy here does a great job of giving very detailed graphs and things like that, and definitely puts out some great information. And a few of the things that stood out was just some of the things he drew up with his graphs, and primarily in the oil sector, because he's a big guy who's really concerned with how oil drives the economy. If oil is not profitable, then everything else stands to be at a loss. And so here he listed various energy companies and show how they've taken on massive debt. And here, 2007, it was 17 trillion, or I'm sorry, billion, and now without them being profitable, they just borrowed more money to kind of stay afloat. And then he talks about just the price of crude oil and things like that, and basically all these companies are indebted, and their productivity has slowed down. It says top U.S. shale oil field productions have all dropped. So the U.S. shale industry, according to him, is in danger of basically just causing a major hiccup beyond all the banking and things like that. And so another great article to check out, and just definitely just more insight into how bad things really are in the economy because of debt. So I would recommend reading this. And then here, the next one by John Malden on Tumblr, and he's an economist slash investor, but yet he also mentions the fact that we can't borrow from the future anymore. And so he goes on to talk about one of the BIS, Business of International Settlements, former economist Bill White, and a talk he had, and just how over the years he's kind of foreshadowed the things that happen in the economy. And so he lists a couple things that he's knowledge he's got from him, and how basically monetary policy, according to how the central banks operate, according to him, is failing. Paul Krugman's model and theory of economics is failing, and central banks are basically running scared, not knowing what to do. So he lists various graphs here to kind of hint at and show his case of how monetary policy is really out of control, and that debt is the catalyst for it. And so basically said every government, every central bank is addicted to debt, and he lists more graphs here. So just more information as to how indebted the world is, and how basically fiscal policy keeps the monetary powers that be at work, creating more debt. And so great article there from him. And then the next one This one here has to do with the European crisis and how the banking sector is, going to be something that's going to be dealt with or heard about really soon, even more than what's talked about now. But it said when it comes to banks in Europe, where there's smoke, there's fire. And so this guy here, David Kudla from Market Watch, he basically goes through and just basically says since 2008, the United States and the Federal Reserve came up with various programs to deal with our issues here. TARP, TALF, and the QE, and all things that was meant to address the banking crisis here in the United States. But what he's saying is now that same type of crisis is going to happen in Europe with the ECB having to do similar policies, even though they're already in negative territory. They're already buying government bonds, private bonds. They're already buying up all this debt. And so he's basically saying the stock markets there are going to really start tanking. Certain banks such as Deutsche Bank and this market here is down 27%. So he's doing a good job of painting the picture of what's reality is the fact that Europe is in trouble, and now the ECB is going to have to become basically the lender of first, last, and only resort. And then he mentions that with nearly 13 trillion negative yielding sovereign bonds worldwide, it appears that some of the strongest nations are caught in a disinflationary trend, as evidenced by the reaction of bond yields that continue to spiral down. So just mentioning that the fact that the debt ain't worth much. So what do you do? But more stats, more numbers here, definitely worthwhile. Here we have a interesting piece where Bonner and Partners just mentions about the dollar and how it's basically become counterfeit. And since 1971, once the gold standard was removed, ever since then, central banks have just basically taken advantage of the opportunity of creating, fake money to basically, buy up real things. And so he mentioned that there's a conference they attended, of which the author, Gilder, from his new book, The Scandal of Money, basically just gives some more insight into how we've arrived at where we're at. And some interesting stats is that the richer are getting richer. The people who are closer to the banking system are the first ones to get dibs at this newly created fake money, as he called it. So interesting read. Next one, Financial Sense. Sovereign debt downgrades accelerate in 2016. So just another perspective from another author, from another company about how debt. And so here he lists several different countries that have been downgraded by Fitch, Moody's, and Standard & Poor's. And so in I think it was 2015, there were 15 downgrades. Or I'm sorry, it says so far this year, Standard & Poor's has downgraded 16 sovereigns, Moody's downgraded 24, and Fitch has downgraded 15. All of these present significant increases over downgrades for 2015, with many countries on the negative watch and marked as approximate downgrade risk. So basically just, countries, these are countries. These aren't, companies. These are, sovereign, nations that basically produce nothing but borrow everything. It says most of the countries whose debt has been downgraded are commonly commodity producers such as Brazil, Kazakhstan, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria. So these are countries that are, the GDP is, not high, and their borrowing is through the roof. So he just, talks about that and his forecasts on, things that come and, where and kind of how to keep an eye on things. Interesting. Next one, very good one. Ahead of the 200 trillion stock market crash, make sure to own these two investments. And so Jack Delaney basically talks about how things have not improved since 2008. And he actually gives, some insight into how the 600 trillion in derivative contracts, 200 trillion of public and private debt. The Federal Reserve's response to that is basically pumping up the stock market to all-time highs, where the mainstream media basically just, only promotes what they appear to see, which is the numbers going up, but not really saying why. And so here, ultimately, I'm sure and I know what the ideal investments are. And so one thing that's, not typically preached is beyond gold and silver. He says hold cash, being that cash in the days ahead will be able to purchase you, assets that are, going on the cheap, just because, people are going to be looking for, capital. So holding cash and holding gold is what, he recommends here. And the last one. The Curious Case of Vanishing Lady Liberty. Only gold and silver remember her. And so this is from Minion Vale. Minionville, however I pronounce that. But this is about a week or two ago. But it's interesting how it talks about just the idea of liberty and how prior to the Federal Reserve pretty much taking over the monetary system with the daily usage of the Federal Reserve note, how the concept of liberty and the young lady who was referred to and represented liberty has been removed from any and every piece of history. Um, and it gives several different stages in which the concept of liberty was removed from coins and things like that, and how, most Americans even are not even aware of the fact that, Lady Liberty was on the basically on our coinage, for I think it said about 154 years. And so since then, the idea of liberty has been removed from our money and our monetary, policy for the most part, to where, the millennial generation has no clue about, liberty and how that was all associated with our money supply being, in the hands of the United States government and not a private centralized organization. So, interesting article here. A lot of historical information about different coins that had liberty and things like that on it, and very detailed. So once again, just a little information there from the news. Hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think. I'm hoping to bring more news and just stay on tune to these things, because I get a chance to learn and find out what's going on, and I'm assuming that you might want to have more condensed news source yourself. So other than that, have a good day. See you soon.